Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Workers' Voices. Today, we are very pleased to welcome James Ritchei, the Workers' Spokesperson of the Standard Setting Committee on Biological Hazards. With James, we will be discussing the new international labor standards on biological hazards, an important milestones aimed to strengthen protections for workers around the world. Welcome, James, and thank you very much for joining us today. Um, James, to begin with, why do new international labor standards on biological hazards matters for workers today? We are here at the ILO to discuss about the International Labor Conference, but why these new standards matters for workers today?
Well, thank you, Mamadou. And these international standards come on the back of a global pandemic in 1920 and 21, the COVID pandemic. And during that time, it became apparent to everyone that biological hazards, particularly viruses and bacteria that cause infectious diseases, are a threat to all people, but also people in the working environment, including people who are frontline workers who have to work in such circumstances. And so there are various public health initiatives that are important, public health protections, and that is the responsibility globally of the World Health Organization. But for occupational safety and health, it is absolutely critical that the International Labour Organization develops standards so that workers are protected now and in the future, not just from pandemics and epidemics, but infectious diseases arising from the course of their work generally, and the toxins, allergens, and venoms, etc., that come from animals and mosquitoes, particularly for workers who are working outdoors. So they're protected also. This builds on the fundamental principle and right at work, Conventions 155 and 187, which are part of the human rights framework now, and it fills a normative gap in biological hazards.
James, these standards come in form of both a convention but also a recommendations. Can you explain what benefit these new two instruments bring for workers but also their organizations?
Well, it's first of all with the convention. It's very important to have a convention because it will be ratified by countries and come into effect in those countries. And the more countries that ratify it, the better. And we hope there will be a snowball effect, so more and more countries will ratify. But it will be the international standard, an ILO convention. With regard to the recommendation, what it does is that it supplements the convention by giving more explanation and guidance so that when the convention is being implemented by workers, by governments, by employers, there is further guidance, such as the guidance on the importance of taking into account exposure to biological hazards by more vulnerable groups, such as migrant workers, such as women workers, such as pregnant and breastfeeding workers, such as workers whose employment status is not the normal employer-employee relationship. So all of those issues are important. It also singles out certain occupations and sectors which are more prevalent to risk from biological hazards and encourages governments to do risk assessments in those particular sectors and occupations. So both instruments are very important. The convention is the standard and the recommendation supplements the convention to give guidance.
In terms of responsibilities and actions, what are your expectations of the ILO governments and employers also following the adoption of these standards?
Well, for governments, of course, governments are responsible for the national legislation in their own territories. We hope that governments will ratify this convention, and then they will, having ratified the convention, they will enact laws and regulations to reflect the international convention, which gives protections to the working population. On behalf of employers, employers are responsible for safety and health in the workplace, and we believe that the convention will assist employers greatly in making sure that the working environment is safe and healthy for all workers, and they will do that in consultation with workers and their representatives and their organisations, and participation in those processes by undertaking the methods set out in Convention 155 on the hierarchy of hazard control. So it will be very useful for for governments, for employers and workers in making the workplace safer.
Let's talk about the role of trade unions. How do you see unions contributing to the promotion, but also in monitoring of the implementation of these new standards?
Well, first of all, trade unions grew out of the need to make workplaces safe and healthy. It's a foundation principle of trade unions everywhere in the world. And so trade unions need to demand participation in the implementation of this convention and the implementation of all aspects of a healthy and safe workplace. They also need to learn to understand the content of the convention and the supporting recommendation, so it can be used as an organising tool in working environments to make those working environments adhere to the standards. So the first point is around understanding. The second point is around organising and campaigning around these standards. And thirdly, a lobbying of governments to ratify the convention and make sure that national laws and regulations are in compliance with that convention.
Yeah. Now that these standards have been adopted, in your view, what are the next steps for the labor movement, both globally and also at national level, in terms of monitoring, but also ratifications of these instruments?
Well, I think the next steps in the labour movement are to be much better prepared for any outbreak of infectious diseases, whether or not that becomes an epidemic or a pandemic or not. The outbreaks of infectious diseases will increase because of the climate crisis, because of environmental degradation, and because of increased military conflict. So preparation is key, and this particular convention and recommendation assists with that preparation. And so organising, lobbying, preparation, being prepared, making sure governments do not put frontline workers at risk in any future outbreak of infectious disease, and that all workers, including health workers, of course, are appropriately protected from the hazards in their working environment.
James, we are here at the 113 sessions of the International Labour Conference where these instruments have been adopted. Let's imagine that you are talking to unions or workers in the informal economy in one capital like Accra in Ghana or in New Delhi from India. What is your message to workers around the world regarding these new protections and their potential impact for them?
Yes, thank you for that very good question. I mean, the first step always is to fight for the rights around the enabling rights around freedom of association and the right to organise and enter into collective bargaining. But that sounds a little bit abstract. The first step, of course, is for informal workers to talk to each other, to understand that they're all being treated in the same way. They need to form collective organisations, and then they need to make sure that the standards that apply to directly employed workers also apply to workers in various other forms of employment, other forms of precarious employment, be they informal workers, temporary workers, platform workers, all workers. The convention applies to all workers. So those workers must organise to defend and promote their rights, and must lobby governments for recognition that they are workers and they deserve the protection and of workers' rights and the entire framework of international human rights.